Hello, and welcome back to the Holistically Awakened podcast. I'm your host, Laurence. And today I want to talk about a topic that I hear a lot in my coaching containers that I've also experienced myself. I want to bring this into this conversation today because it is so common, especially if you can relate to going through a spiritual awakening, inner healing journey, doing the work on yourself to help process emotions, heal like childhood wounds, inner child healing, shadow work, etc. Mindset work, even therapy, somatic healing, like all of these things. And it really starts with the sentence, I thought I already healed this. Have you ever thought about this? Have you ever thought this? Have you ever said it? I know that I have, and I've seen a lot of clients also revert to this. And this is very much when we go into we have a feeling that we think healing should be linear. It should, follow a certain pattern. It should, go at a certain pace or speed. And a lot of the time, this is when we put pressure on ourselves and we have these expectations for healing, which is something that we can't control. So maybe you've meditated or you've journaled or, you've reflected on a particular trigger, limiting belief, childhood wound, etc. Maybe you have so much awareness around it. Like, I know where this comes from. I know what my patterns are, etc., etc., etc. So why the F is it showing up again? It likely has not been processed in the body. We can intellectually understand something, have awareness around it, but if we haven't processed it in the body on a somatic level, it will keep showing up. And sometimes it gets louder and louder. This is because it's also imprinted on an emotional and energetic level. And it's something that has an emotional charge, which is why it's likely has become, a belief, part of your identity, because it has an emotional charge attached to it. And so there's many emotions that can be attached to this belief, this wounding, this whatever it is, I'm not good enough, etc. And so this is where if we just process it in the mind, we talk about it, we have awareness around it, that's great, but we're missing the body part. And that's really about processing it somatically and meeting it on a different level. And so this is what, many coaching containers and counseling, etc., therapy can do. But it's really oftentimes we stop at the talking level and we really want to process it on the body level. Heart's work can be great for this. And so that's one point that I want to say that it likely hasn't been processed on the body level. And so this is where working with someone on this can be really powerful. But that awareness can be so helpful in itself because otherwise we can feel like something's wrong with us or like, why do I still keep dealing with this thing? And it's really not something that we need to fix. It's a part of us that is unacknowledged, it's unseen, unheard, not feeling like it's really acknowledged by ourselves. And so this is something that I recently experienced as well when I was in a container where this showed up for me. And so this is why I wanted to bring this conversation because it's also something that is not like a one and done. And even if it's like a particular wounding around like limiting belief or whatever, oftentimes that wound, quote unquote, can very likely keep showing up. And it could keep showing up. And that doesn't mean anything's particularly wrong. We heal in layers and it can show up in different ways. But what's important is whether you are acting unconsciously from these wounds, these limiting beliefs, etc., or not. Like, for example, if it's something around like proving yourself to be worthy, to be accepted, to be loved, and you find yourself constantly like hustling and trying to achieve, but you're like at the detriment of your health, your well-being, you're burning out, and you're sort of on autopilot and not really, having that awareness around what your relationship is like with yourself in pursuing this and what is the driving force to get approval or whatever it is to be accepted, loved, when that is coming from a wounding of not feeling good enough. And so this is where it can show up in many different ways, and it can continue to show up even if we've done a lot of healing around it. And that doesn't mean anything's necessarily wrong. Maybe a trigger comes up, maybe you feel the emotion in your body, but are you leading your life from that unconscious place? Or are you separating yourself from it? Because it is a part, but it's not the core self. And are you really moving, taking action in your life, making decisions, responding from a place of regulation, centeredness, groundedness, with the awareness that, this part is showing up right now and it wants to be seen or whatever it is. But we are not reacting from that part. That is the big difference. And the more that we have awareness, we bring healing to this, that we acknowledge it, the more that we can actually take that pause, meet our needs, acknowledge whatever's coming up, and then act differently. And this is where we start to break patterns, cycles, even generational cycles, because we are not reacting, we are responding now. And this is where like our core self can actually see the situation, and we can ask ourselves, how do I actually want to proceed? So for me, after my spiritual awakening, I hit some really tough personal lows, and I didn't realize how they really did affect me. And there was for a long time, I was sort of beating myself up around not really, taking action that I wanted or getting ahead. And it was just pressuring myself and shaming myself when I didn't realize that a lot of these experiences that had happened, really did affect me on a nervous system level, but I hadn't really looked at it. I hadn't really processed it, hadn't really acknowledged it. And what happened was I noticed that my emotional intelligence felt like it sort of like decreased. My energy tanked. I was way more reactive than I wanted to be. And I was reacting more than actually responding, and sort of just being thrown around in terms of like letting life happen to me. And I grew really frustrated because there was so much awareness, because I had done a lot of healing and emotional intelligence work and nervous system work and mindset work and all of these things. And I kept trying to get back to that place where I was, feeling really good within myself and confident and aligned and empowered and all these things. And I found that it was actually very hard. And this actually made me spiral, because I thought I was failing, like I was going backwards. Why am I like this? Like, why can't I get my shit together or whatever? And I put a lot of pressure on myself to heal and just get on with it. And this was really from a place of like trying to get somewhere else and prove myself. But ironically, that pressure only made things worse, and it pushed me farther into freeze mode, which was just like feeling a little bit paralyzed, like just stuck and not really taking action and procrastinating and over analyzing every next step, and just feeling really like I was stuck in mud, really. And honestly, I'd never felt so lost, confused, and burnt out. And this was probably like the darkest night of the soul of my life. And this was really not so long ago. And I've had dark nights of the soul, but this was really different because I could feel like there was awareness, but I just couldn't get unstuck. I just felt like I was in the same place and not really showing up the way that I wanted to, but I couldn't like motivate myself or willpower myself out of it. And this is what happens when our nervous system does not have the capacity. But I didn't really understand that. And I didn't really have a lot of capacity to even have the compassion and acknowledgement that I needed, as well as there was just a lot of pressure to just get ahead and ignore it, because it felt like a waste of time. What I didn't realize that my survival mechanisms were obviously kicking in, and these protective parts of me that were sabotaging or whatever, procrastinating, weren't actually sabotaging me. They never really are. Sabotage is always about protection. And this was about shielding me from feeling things that I wasn't ready to face and feel, and things that I really didn't want to see and that I wasn't really ready for, like it didn't have the capacity for. And this is oftentimes where we need to work on the body level first, instead of being like, mindset and motivation, all of these things. If the body is not on board, it's going to put on the brakes and the body's going to win. So I learned this the hard way. And I see this a lot. And this is where, old wounding came up and the one that I swore that I healed, but it's not because we haven't healed it, quote unquote, but healing is always meant to deepen and there's always another layer. And each time it comes up, it's an invitation to see it with new awareness, to meet it with more wisdom. And it's not about like, oh, this thing is coming up again for me. I thought I already saw this with like my therapist or whatever. You're meeting the same lesson, or maybe it's another version of the lesson, the wounding from a different vantage point. There's more nuance, there's likely more awareness, and you're obviously not the person who you were when you first had awareness around this. And oftentimes, is what happened for me too. There are certain aspects that are unconscious, and some of these things will come to the surface of like, oh, I didn't realize that I was acting like that because of this experience or the meaning that I had behind it, or I had all of these feelings that I was associating with it. And what you'll notice is that when you see something, you can't unsee it. So you already have this awareness, but oftentimes that will come in layers and it will be revealed bit by bit at the level that we have the capacity to see it, etc. So we won't really see something before we're ready to see it. And oftentimes this is frustrating to the ego because we think that, we have all of these expectations and timelines, but this is what happens with healing. As certain things are not in your conscious awareness, and that's for a reason, until they come to your conscious awareness, and now you have something to work with. And this will, be revealed bit by bit, layer by layer, and there's no way to predict it. There's no way to, what's the word? Like speed up the process. And it just happens as you go through this journey. So healing, it really isn't linear. It's never done. You don't complete it, you deepen it. You gain more awareness, more nuance, more self-trust. It's really just a growth and evolution journey. And sometimes it may look like you're going backwards, like it felt like for me. But according to who? What timeline? If you're here, you're also doing the work, I'm gathering, you're likely breaking generations of patterns and cycles and conditioning and really looking at yourself from, a different viewpoint and taking responsibility for your healing in your life, which is something that is quite new for these new generations, because a lot of the stuff we didn't look at before. So this is where we really need to be compassionate with ourselves as well, because some stuff that we're dealing with is generational. It's not even ours, but we are the ones to break the cycles, the patterns, and it is a big job. So this is a lot to take on as a human being. And I think that there is a lot of shaming on the journey, which I've, experienced myself, where we just want to get on with it, or we're frustrated that this is coming up again, or why did I react that way, etc. And it's really important to have self-compassion. Obviously, like we can learn the lesson and apply the learnings and break the patterns and decide differently, move differently, etc. But it's also really important to have compassion for ourselves, because you likely feel the pressure from external sources, etc. We don't need that from ourselves. We don't need pressure or shame. That is not going to help the process. That actually makes us feel more stuck. Acknowledgement and compassion is actually the portal to moving through this stuff, to alchemizing it, because this is where these things, these wounds, these beliefs, these triggers, they actually get bigger and louder when we don't acknowledge them. It's when we shine a light. So you're really right where you're meant to be. And this is really the message that I have with every new moment of awareness, every act of acknowledgement, every ounce of self-compassion. You're becoming someone new, and you can never truly go back to who you were in the past. And I think it's oftentimes easy to miss or overlook the progress that we are making, because it's oftentimes in those little moments where we take a pause, we have a different response, we have new awareness that is actually breaking the patterns, cycles, even generational trauma, where we are reprogramming our nervous system and subconscious mind. But there are little things that happen on a day-to-day basis, moment to moment. Oftentimes we look for the huge proof, like the big thing that's going to, prove that we are making progress. But it all adds up. And specifically, when we do embody and integrate this shifts on a cellular level, on a subconscious level. And that is actually what is being programmed into ourselves and that we get to pass on, etc. This is what is shifting our identity. So if you're on this healing journey with me, I just want to say I see you, and this is the most important work that you will ever do.